Hey, Nick, thanks for joining us today. As way of getting started, give us a little background on yourself.
Hey, Brian, thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm a New York City guy, born and raised and well, in Long Island, but then lived in New York City. And, when you grow up over there, you always have aspirations of being on Wall Street, right? It's kind of like you want to be a finance guy. It's the New York
Yeah.
dream. So I was lucky enough to do finance in college, internships, and get my dream job on Wall Street. What nobody told me at a young age was that dream job didn't really pay very much. So I
No
witnessed.
limos?
No. It was not what I thought it was. It was a lot like the movies though, right? Chaos, hazing. It was fun. Don't get me wrong. But to be honest with you, I witnessed the collapse in 2008. Right.
Yeah.
So if you know a little bit about the floor at Wall Street, there was about 4 or 5 different rooms packed, and within 1 week it collapsed to one room. And
Wow.
it was decimated. It was sad. And I honestly didn't lose my job because they weren't paying me enough. Didn't make sense to fire me. So the reason everything switched was because of technology. And it was just a coincidence that at that point I said, you know what, I think I need to do something different in my career. And I got lucky enough to meet a woman on a train, actually, who was in marketing and got me into sales. So it's pretty cool story.
And did you like it at first or was it awkward?
Great question. It was awkward, right?
Yeah.
Because you start at the bottom of the totem pole, and,
Again.
and you're cold calling, and you're like, oh my god, I never did this before, and oh my god, I hate when people cold call me. So it's definitely awkward. But once you have that first bit of success and you realize how to communicate with people and how to introduce yourself appropriately, it got somewhat natural. And I was fortunate enough to work for a very small startup email security company that put me through the right training. And it got a little less uncomfortable as time went on.
And the finance background, clearly money motivated. Is that one of the top whys? Is financial success?
Yeah, I think we're all a little money motivated, right? I think that's why I wake up.
Nothing wrong with it.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with it. But I like the process of honestly, what I was doing Wall Street was I wanted to work with clients, right, and help build their portfolio. So it was always about working with a team and just a group around me. Honestly, I didn't think of the revenue and the money first, right? It was more or less, how do I build something? And that just ended up bringing me to sales, and then building a team around me.
And how did you learn selling skills and kind of understanding it? Certainly, because you've done enterprise stuff, right? So it's large deals, complex, highly competitive, lots of options.
Yeah.
How did you get that under your belt?
Number one, I was fortunate to go through a lot of training, right?
Yeah.
So I've done Sandler training, I've done spin. So you take a little bit, I think you have to take a little bit of your skill set from each one of those. I don't think you could just say, oh, I'm a Sandler trainer, right? And because I think you got to take a little bit of everything and what's natural for you. And that's what I've done. So I think over time, you just learn what comes natural, because I think the most important thing you could do as a sales rep is be authentic, right? You want people to understand, like, hey, this guy is real. This guy is authentic. This guy cares, right? And by the way, it can't just feel that way. It has to be authentic, right? Like,
Right.
your
Well, they
customers
have to feel it, not just us.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, they have to feel it's authentic. And look, it makes it a lot easier when you are authentic with them, right? And you do truly like who you're working with, and you could get along. And look, we could always find something we get along with or connect on, right? And I think that's the important thing. And I think early in my career, I was able to do that and learn that the connection to your customers is probably the most important thing you could do.
And how about as far as like large organizations? I mean, because like at some of the previous companies, you're touching a lot of different groups within the company, the customer's company.
Yeah, it's complex, right? And I think, attention to detail is critical. And I think making sure that you're paying attention, look, org charts, right? Everything from preparation to org charts to what each group individually cares about. It really changes the dynamic, because to your point, there could be 15 different companies inside of one company. And if you're not organized and you're not understanding what drives each group individually, you're never going to bring all of them together for the common goal of hopefully buying your software, right? So it's definitely a unique challenge, and something that it took some time to get used to, because again, early in the career, you're dealing with the smaller enterprises, right? The 50-person shops, and you're cutting your teeth and learning how to deal with that. And then all of a sudden you have your first experience and you walk into an account that's like, a massive Disney of the world, right? And you're like, oh man, how do I navigate this? right? So I just think the preparation, the attention to detail, taking notes and strategizing with your team, right? Like, we're not superheroes by any means. If anything, we're the dumbest guy in the room usually, right? We always, I shouldn't say, not usually. So we need a whole team around us that we just need to bounce ideas off of and build a strategy with. And that's what I learned pretty early on.
And given that, how did you learn enough to not just be the guy accompanying the other people, the engineer, your manager, which is okay at first, but sooner or later, you got to have your own conversations with people about what they care about. How did you learn? Because you've sold pretty complex stuff, right? How did you learn all that?
I think it's all about the conversation and how you deliver a message, right? And how you pull people aside and, you talk to them as one-on-one and understand what, and look, Brian, I also think it's important to know that people have personal goals also, right? So as we build champions, there's personal reasons that they're looking at your software, right? Maybe it's to build their resume, right? Maybe it's because they don't like whatever it is, the conversation needs to be personal, I think, with whoever you're working with to understand all that first and build them up. But I also think at some point you have to stand up in the room and be the quarterback and be the leader, because your engineers look to you to drive the preparation, to drive the demo meeting, right? Like everything kind of is looking at you as the lead. And I think at some point you have to stand up with confidence and be like, I got this, guys. This is what we're going to do. And everyone plays a role, and this is the role we all need to play.
Yeah. And a lot of people overlook that personal win, but that's really why people buy.
100%. I think that's if you're not taking what we do personal, as a sales individual, I don't think you'll ever be successful, right? Because, as good as your technology is, you need to understand that organization is also putting their trust in you personally, right? And if you don't take that responsibility personal in as well as they are, then you'll never be successful, because if they fail, that's on you. They trusted you, right? And I think that if we're not, as sales reps, taking every opportunity and every account we're talking to and every individual and champion personal to us, we're going to fail.
Well, what was the hardest lesson you learned coming up?
I wasn't good at, and I've said the word preparation, I think, a couple times on here, because I've gotten it beaten into me. I was really bad at preparing for meetings, right? You have some early success and you're young. I was 21 years old when I got into this, and I walk into a room and I'm like, I don't need to prep. I got this. Yeah. Like we'll wing it, guys. Right. And you learn that when you start to get into the more complex situations, you're not just going to make yourself look like an idiot, Brian, but even worse, you're going to make your team look stupid, because your engineer's not prepared, your manager's not prepared. And that's when you learn a lesson, because you walk into the parking lot and your engineer says, hey man, don't ever do that to me again. Right. I wasn't prepared for that meeting. And you're like, I'll never do that again. Right. And I actually have an engineer, I'll name drop him, Mario Garces. Right. There's been a couple of times where Mario would say, I'm not showing up today. I'm not showing up. You didn't prepare me enough. And it actually changed everything about the way I sell, because if you're not prepared, you're going to fail.
And that's it, because sales, certainly in the complex sale, we don't really have a way of practicing.
Yeah.
And the last thing you want to do is practice on a 6-figure, 7-figure deal.
Yeah.
Because when game over comes up, it's like, that's a lot of money that you wasted practicing.
Yeah. There's no dry runs. You can't go back and say, hey, can I do that one over again?
No.
And look, I've gotten to a point where some prep calls are 5 seconds long, and they're like, Nick, we're prepped enough. Like, we're good. We're ready to go. Right. And whether you're role playing or, I think my problem was I thought preparation was going to lead to things being unnatural, like staged.
Just the opposite. Yeah,
exactly. And I never wanted to go into a meeting and make it feel like, okay, now you say this, now you say this. It actually, when you wing it, everyone's looking at each other, and it was terrible. Where when you're prepared, who's going to answer certain questions, right? And I also think part of preparation is saying, they're going to ask us this question, and oh, by the way, we can't do that, and we don't have the answer to it. So being honest and building that trust from the preparation is huge.
And that's it, because clearly you're a sports guy, right?
Yeah.
The lacrosse. And it's like, you would never go out on the field cold.
Yeah.
Why? Because it's just stupid, right? You got to warm up. You got to run around the field. You got to throw the ball back and forth. It's just, rehearsal, prep, warm up.
Yeah.
And I've been that engineer where some sales rep brings you into some hokey meeting that you had to fly to and get up at 4 a.m. and you're like, you didn't need me there.
Hmm.
And you don't even know this isn't qualified.
Yeah.
You get some kid telling you it's not qualified, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I've been fortunate, and you said you were an engineer, right? I also think it's the engineer's responsibility because we're a team, right? As you know, we win as a team and we typically lose as individuals, right? So when we lose, you got to raise your hand and say, hey, I messed this up. But when you win, it has to be about your engineers, the channel, your management, legal, order ops, deal to everyone is in this to win. And I try to build a culture where if we're not prepared, someone raises their hand and is like, Nick, you're not doing the right thing here, right? And I think that's when you really are successful because we're all in it for the same objective of like having this meeting go really well as step one. And then the end goal is obviously winning in order. But we all just have to be on the same page and communicating.
And how about the cultural change going from Long Island, Manhattan to South Florida?
Yeah, I think it helped me a lot, right? Because in New York, living in Manhattan, you're always on 24/7, right? A customer calls you at 9 o'clock at night. It's not you, and you don't answer. That's not acceptable, right? Because by the way, someone else is going to answer, and you're going to be out. So I think coming to South Florida, where it's a little bit more laid back, being on top of that and always available and attention to detail, right? I think helped me separate a little bit, and help me build trust with my clients. I just think the always on was something that really helped me in my career from New York.
And have you done a leadership role yet?
So I've done a lot of mentoring, and things like that. I'm not sure I'm ready for the leadership from a reliant on other people. Like I like to have yes, I like to have my book in front of me and understand that I'm responsible for my success or not. I don't think mentally I'm prepared to lead others in that sense, but I love the mentorship. I love the coaching side of it and things like that. I just don't know if I'm ready for them to be my number or not.
And when other reps come to you, what do you typically see them either wanting or missing?
So I think the first question I got is if you were, if you know what you know now, what would you do on day one? Right. I think that's like the first question I always get.
Yeah.
And the answer is pretty simple, right? From where we are now, it's, strategize on your accounts, stack write them, most important, right? What is most relevant to what you sell? Because, for every software you sell, there is a target customer, right? And I think understanding who the best targets are for what you're doing specifically is the top ones. But then I think you got to peel the onion back because I also think too many salespeople and too many managers even, right? They put everything in verticals, right? Like hospitality, right? Hospital, right? Whatever it is. And we call on all of them as if they're all the same, but each and every single one of them is different. They have their different challenges. They have their own, whatever they're trying to go through. So I always try to say, take that customer and spend a day understanding what are their goals of their organization? What are their challenges currently? Because most of them definitely have challenges because of the current economic state and COVID, whatever it is. Understand what your unique value is to those specific challenges, not just bulk them all together as a vertical. So that's usually my first piece of advice.
Well, what's great about that is that's what creates empathy, the understanding of what they're going through. Most reps do just the opposite. They're talking about what feature should we hit on? What differentiator should we pound on? Yeah. How do we push to get the POC or the proof of value or whatever it is? And that's all vendor forward instead of customer focused.
Yeah, I think it all has to be natural, right? We follow a process, don't get me wrong. And I think that process is what keeps, especially us ADD knucklehead sales guys, right, in line. But I also think if you're pushing on a first meeting to jump into a POV without understanding why they'd want to do a POV and why the POV would be valuable to them, they're going to look at you like, oh, this is just a pushy sales guy who just wants to get to the next step, right? I think naturally when the customer raises their hand and says, we'd like to see that, right? I was like, great, right? Let's do it, But I think you have to let it kind of naturally happen while also pulling out the pain in them in a sense.
And this view of it being more of a thinking game. Mm-hmm. Now, when you started doing it, was it more of a numbers game? Or did somebody always tell you, use your judgment, your intellect, your analysis, and prioritization?
Yeah. Yeah. Look, I think and I actually think I saw you post something really funny where it was like, 300%, 3x pipeline, 100, and it's so true, because you could have a 10x pipeline and it be 90% crap, right? I'm very much about, building the right opportunities and thinking about them, which one are real. I think one of the biggest skill sets a sales guy could have is understanding what's real and what's not real.
Yes.
Right. There's that moment in a meeting where you're in your head, you should say, I got this, right? What they're struggling with fits so perfectly with what I could provide them, right? This is real. And then there's those other meetings where it's like, this customer doesn't get what we do and they're not there yet, or their pain really isn't big enough for me to give them a 7-figure quote, right? I gotta back out of this. So I think pipeline generation is huge, and it is numbers, don't get me wrong, but I also think it's thinking about your opportunities in a more strategic way as well.
Yeah,
I don't know if that answers your question, but it sparked something on me.
It does, because I think of it as almost a sixth sense, where you're in the meeting and you can see 3-6 months ahead where this deal's going.
Yeah.
Where it's like, oh, it's the end of the quarter, and they tell you it's in procurement, and you find out they really haven't forwarded the proposal anywhere.
Yeah.
Right, because it's that judgment, that sense of, is this real?
Yeah.
And that takes a while to develop, because certainly at the beginning, what do we want?
Mm-hmm.
Anything, right? Any evidence of action or success is great.
Yeah, just give me something to bite, right? Give me something to bite on. And it's funny because, in what I'm doing now, there's a lot of competition in a lot of my clients. And you typically hear, we love them, we're happy, right? And then you have a couple meetings and they start to say, well, they can't do that. And you listen enough and you understand, you don't sound so happy, right? And that's when you start to realize, like, okay, there's something here, right? And that has actually really changed my mentality post sales, right? Because if the customer is complaining to you, right, as the competitor, that guy on the other side is not doing his job, because that customer should be complaining to him to get it right. So anything I sell post sales, I'm constantly asking 3 months, 6 months, not a year down the line, are you getting what I promised, right? Are we doing what we said? Because you want to hear those complaints from the customer. You don't want them telling you competition. And when you start hearing that from the other side, you're like, okay, this is real. There's an opportunity here.
Yeah. And what question do you ask to get that? Or do you just build rapport and just kind of?
I think it's more rapport. I think it's more rapport. I also think it's the setting you ask questions in, right? I think a lot of people are in front of their management in a packed room, and they like go into sales 101 where they start asking questions in front of a large audience. They're like, well, what are you doing today? And are you
what are your challenges? What keeps you up at night? What are your
challenges today? And it's not all sunshine and rainbows. Tell me the truth. Nobody's going to do that in a room full of 15 people. So I think it's really the rapport you build with them and you start understanding. And I also like using, other customer examples, where you go to one customer and say, hey, look, I just want to give you an example of what I'm doing for ABC company, very similar to you. Are you seeing similar challenges? Right? And is this an area we could possibly help you? And you sometimes hear like, yeah, actually competitor X promised that and they haven't been able to deliver. And you're like, oh, okay. So they're not delivering everything they promised, right? And I just think that's a one-on-one or rapport thing with your customers versus doing it in a large setting because your manager's in the room and it's the right question to ask.
And what skill do you wish you had that you either don't have or isn't really your strongest suit?
As being smarter an answer, more technical. I've never been super technical, right? And I think that's my own fault, because if you do enough training and you put enough time and effort in, you could learn anything. I think that I've always jumped into roles and been so into getting things accomplished. I upfront never took the time to become super technical. And it hasn't killed me yet, right? Maybe it has in some opportunities. But I think going forward, as I develop and grow, I need to challenge myself to become a little bit more technical in whatever I'm selling, right? I think that's been a challenge for me. Now, on the flip side, I think it's important to know that up front, that I'm not that technical. So when a customer asks me a question, I don't pretend to answer it, right? You have to throw your hands up and say, hey, I don't know that answer, but I have an engineer, or someone, whoever could answer it for you. But I need to improve there for sure.
Yeah. And where do your deals either get stuck or stalled?
That's a really good question. I think this goes back to a weakness of mine. I think sometimes you build too much rapport with a champion and you actually have a hard time asking the uncomfortable question.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes I've been there where your champion actually becomes such an ally and almost such a friend that you have a hard time saying, hey man, we've been doing this for 6 months. What's going on, right? Because that is awkward. So I think sometimes my deals get stuck actually at the champion and understanding what's next because I've built such a good rapport. But on the flip side, you have to be so close with someone and understand that it is business, right? And you have to be able to ask those questions. So what I'm starting to do as I get a little bit more mature in my career is letting the champion know that those questions are coming, right? And there's a process we need to follow to execute this, and that we're all under the same goal, and that there's going to be a time where I'm coming to you saying, hey, where are we, right? And it's not just going to be fun and dinners and everything else, right? Like we're going to have some hard questions at some point.
And do you have a sense about that happening where?
Yeah, you do, because yeah, you do. And you kind of find yourself, at least I find myself panicking a bit because I'm like, I'm getting too close into the friend zone versus being able to ask this guy or gal some really tough questions. I think you have to pump the brakes at that point and just level set on like, hey, or use a manager as an excuse, right? Use somebody as an excuse. Like, hey, I'm getting some pressure on this one. We've been doing this for a long time. Where are we? What's the next steps? But I do think that you have to separate and you have to build your champion to go to bat for you and continue to push the order, not just be a cheerleader in a sense.
And what do you see other reps doing wrong? Doesn't have to be at your current company, could be in the past. Certainly like the people with, the first 5 years of experience. You sit through a QBR and you're like, oh God, that ain't going anywhere.
Yeah. If I can answer this two ways, because I see this quite a bit. And we're getting a lot of new reps in where I am, right? So I'm seeing a lot of this come across right now. So this is kind of fresh for me. I think the first one is not building the right people around you, right? When you're new to an organization, you want to close a deal and raise your hand and say like, I did that, right? Like, you hired me. I'm a great hire, right? Like, blah, blah, blah. It couldn't be more opposite, right? It takes an army of people to win these large strategic deals. And when new reps come in and they try to do it themselves, they fail, right? Every single time. And not just that, the people you need behind you start to root against you because they're like, oh, he doesn't want to bring me in. Oh, like he doesn't know my value. Oh, he's not going to call me. And so you have to, the very first thing I would do is get your ecosystem all in your camp, right? And I think new reps don't do that because they want to look like heroes. The second thing, I don't think people take post-sales serious enough. And I know every organization is different. Sometimes post-sales gets handed over to another group or whatnot. Yeah. So I know it's different, but I think you have to take it so personal because that organization chose you, right? And your technology, not just the technology, they chose you and the technology and your team and your engineers and your management, everybody. You need to take that personal and make sure that you deliver on everything you promise. And too many people sell it and run, right? Just on to the next one.
Well, they think the selling and run is smart, but it's really stupid because that happy client can be your best marketing.
Yeah. And look, Brian, I've had customers that I talk to from a personal level for 10 plus years, right? And some of them I haven't sold a thing to in 8 years, right? But you never know when that day is going to come. And look, I don't just keep those relationships for when that day does come, right? Because I do value those, those relationships and friendships that we built. But if you never know what's going to happen. And look, we spend sometimes 9 months building credibility, right? And why my product is the best in the world. You could blow it in 5 days without delivering the right solution, right? So why would you spend 9 months building credibility and then losing it because you're not delivering?
And that's it, especially in these niche technology. It's not really niche, but it's like in the macro picture it is. And in a geography that I would think South Florida, never sold there, but if they're going to move, you want to go with them to the next company, right?
Exactly. And everyone here knows everybody, right? Like, and I know it's not New York City or Philly or DC, right? Where it's a major, large city, but especially where I am, the cruise lines, for example, people jump, right? They go from one to the other, back to the
back and forth. Yeah.
They go back and forth, right? I'm like, didn't you work here? Like, you're back. Like, so they're all over the place. And a lot of times, you'd be surprised at how many people raise their hand for you and vouch for you, right? And it's just because you delivered what you promised. And at the very least, look, technology is always going to fail, right? If there was one technology that was 100% perfect, like we wouldn't be doing what we do. So you just have to be able to own up and be your biggest advocate, be their customer's biggest advocate, and stand up and help when things go sideways. And I think too many reps run, right? They're like, I did my job, right? Support, go help.
Right. They look at it as a transaction.
Yes.
And then they get upset when they're treated like a transaction.
100%. Yeah. Yeah. Or when you don't talk to someone for 2.5 years and renewals coming up.
Oh yeah. Remember me?
Yeah. And you expect them to be like, oh, what's up, buddy? Like, yeah, let's, like, you didn't talk to them for 2.5 years. What are you doing? It's mind blowing, but it really does happen.
Oh, cool. Hey, Nick, I really enjoyed this. Where can people go to connect and follow you?
So LinkedIn is probably the easiest. I'm not huge social media. So I'm not famous like you, Brian. So I just stay on LinkedIn.
Yo, you will be. Don't worry. After this.
I just stay. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, LinkedIn is probably the easiest. I love to connect. I love to learn more from other reps too, because I think we all have. We're all far from perfect, and I think we could help each other learn what is success is done, which is why I enjoy listening to the folks you have on, because we could always take something from everybody.